Melernie Meheux. I'm an educational psychologist. Today I'm here with Waveney Bushell. Waveney, today I'm going to talk to you about your journey into the profession. You're often referred to as the first female black educational psychologist in the UK, and I'm really delighted to be here to find out more about your history. Tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up, your early childhood.
Well, of course, you know that I grew in Guyana. I was born in Guyana, and my father died when I was very small, and my mother as well. So I really don't know my father at all. My mother, I remember having to read to her. She was very much interested. She was a reader, an avid reader. Growing up in Guyana was being loved. I remember even though my mother died when I was 6, my aunt, her sister, her eldest sister, brought us up. And I say us, there were 3 of us. And I remember the emphasis was on keeping us together and loving us. That was the main thing. And my father's sisters were teachers, and I remember always wanting to teach.
Right.
And when I grew up, and I did. I went to high school and was successful at the then junior Cambridge and senior Cambridge and the higher senior Cambridge, and applied to the local teachers training college and became a teacher.
Right. It sounds like education just sort of runs through the family.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, education was.
And that's kind of what inspired you then to go into the path that you did. So when you arrived in the UK.
Yes, I happened to come to England by chance, really. My friend whom I met in the teachers training college, her friends had come to England and came back to Guyana saying, do you know you can teach in England? They want teachers there. This was, of course, after the war. And the local authorities were really trying to recruit teachers. And I think this caught our imagination. We said, what? To be able to teach in England? That's fine. And my friend, she got married to a chap whom we knew because he visited her while we were in college. We knew him and so on. And she came up first. He came to study. I think the emphasis in those days was among the black people was study and because social advancement was achieved through study. I mean, a lot of the people who grew up in such families aimed to study and achieve their aim in one way or the other. So my friend, she came first, joined her husband, whom she married soon after she left college in Guyana, and literally pestered me, when are you coming, when are you coming? I think that when I got here, which was 2 years after she left Guyana, I think the reason for her asking that question over and over again was because she was lonely.
Right.
She was very, very lonely.
So what was it like at that time? Can you tell me a little bit more when you arrived?
Do you mean socially or?
So socially, what was the education system like?
Yes. Well, I should say that, first of all, that at her advice, I applied to the London County Council
Right.
to become a teacher and was accepted. Our training in the Teachers' College was accepted, and I was accepted. And I came to join the teaching force in England. Life here then was different from that at home. At home, we knew everybody, because I lived in Guyana, and the capital of Guyana, Georgetown, was very small, and we knew everybody. Everybody knew who had gone here and who had gone there. Living here, life here was so different. It was lonely. We soon realized that that we were different, and we were made to keep within our little groups. There was no mixing from one group to the other. And because of that, we were eager to maintain friendships among our own groups. For example, if you walked down the road on Saturdays and saw a black person across the road, whether you knew that person or not, you waved to that person, and we talked about it. Also, there was this business of non-acceptance. I mean, in the shop windows, for example, there would be cards on which were written words to the effect, no dogs, no blacks, and so on. And you realize that you were now something quite different, something that wasn't accepted in the normal course of events. And that made you feel more lonely than you really were.
How did you manage those feelings, Waveney?
Well, we met. The West Indians were known for their dancing, and we met socially, and just kept ourselves happy in that way. It was. It certainly was a way of feeling that you belonged to a group, whereas society showed you that you didn't belong, but it certainly made you feel that you belonged to a special little group and made you feel happy.
So the sense of belonging and the community was really important. And I know that you looked at education, looking at supplementary schools. Tell us a little bit about how that work came about.
Well, the supplementary, I came in 1956, and the supplementary schools didn't start until the 1960s.
Right.
Because as children came to the country, there was much more emphasis based on the differences which we were seen to represent. And our children were different, the educational system was different. In the West Indies, in Guyana, where I came from, there was a greater emphasis on the nursery rhymes, and on children's ability to repeat those rhymes correctly. The educational system was based on things like the repetition of things and the children's ability to remember what was being told. There was certainly no doubt about that.
Right.
There wasn't this emphasis on children's ability to analyze things. There was no reference to that at all. And that made quite a difference on their performance in schools, their performance on tests, which I became involved in. And so our difference was really magnified.
Right. And so did those supplementary schools then support some of the development of those skills then, Waveney?
Yes.
Yeah.
Supplementary schools were started by the West Indians themselves.
Right.
They saw the difference between what was expected of the children who had just arrived and what had been expected of those children while they lived in the country. There was a vast difference. And the teachers, we got together in our friends' sitting rooms, and that was the topic of conversation when we met. What was expected of our children? Were we at home meeting their expectations? Did we feel about our children the same way that the local people felt?
Right.
And we thought that the answer was to be able to teach the children as teaching was seen to be in this country, because teaching was quite different.
Right.
And many supplementary schools focused on children's ability to see themselves as important members of the school community. So not only was school work done in the supplementary schools, but there was emphasis on one's culture
Right.
and one's history. And it was felt by many of the teachers that children needed to feel good about themselves, and that feeling good was what was necessary for them to be able to produce work in the classroom.
Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like studying psychology?
Yes, I think I need to tell you about the place where I studied.
Yeah.
And the content matter, perhaps. Perhaps you're more interested in the content matter. Content?
I think both sound
Oh,
brilliant.
yes. Well, as I said before, I went to Bedford College and I applied there because it was a London school and I was teaching in London, and I thought that I thought definitely that during the school holidays, the college holidays, I would be able to teach at my old school, because it was money I was thinking of. I didn't realize that Bedford College, A, was a girls' school, and therefore was a rather sort of upper class place compared with UC, which I had applied to and didn't get into. I did get into Bristol, but I didn't want to go out of London for the reasons that I gave you. the college was exclusively middle class. And there were, to my knowledge, just two black girls there, myself and a girl from Jamaica. She was reading sociology, so our timetables weren't the same, but we saw to it that we met in the common room every day. After a while, I knew when she would be off, and she knew when I would be off. And we became very good friends. I felt very lonely there. Our class had, I think, about 14 girls who obviously thought that they were a cut above other people, and especially the blacks. So I didn't make a lot of friends, and I don't think that my friend from Jamaica did either. I had two friends there. One was a Jewish girl who befriended me. I mean, sought me out. And when I first attended the class, and another English friend. I think she was lonely too. But anyhow, we became friends. I soon realized there that expectations of me were really poor. I got, I think, fairly good marks, but my work was really inconsistent. I know that, looking back now, I know it. But what struck me was what happened to me in my second year when I did some work, and I'd never forget that, what that did for me, that experience. Our tutor, the tutor concerned, said to us, be as critical as you want to be. And I was critical. I don't know. Obviously, my essay was good. I got back my essay without a mark. No mark. And I was told what was written at the bottom of the essay was, quote your references. I couldn't understand this. Anyhow, I went to the tutor's room. He was rather dismissive of me. He said, I just said, quote your references. I said, but I have. There's nothing else to quote. And he just dismissed me. Afterwards, I realized that that bit of the essay which I had written, which he felt I shouldn't have written, obviously, represented references which I didn't quote, according to him. And then I realized that, well, expectations of my work are really low. There's nothing I can do about it. I was very hurt. There was no discussion about it. It's interesting that years ago I met Diane Abbott, and she said exactly the same thing happened to her. It's interesting. Well, this tutor's behavior was quite the opposite to that which was shown by another tutor who, when I did some work, called me and said, "Are you worried about anything? What's the matter? Why is your work not as," he didn't say it in this way, but "not as good as it has been before"? Well, we can leave that to people's imagination, what they want to say. But that did have a strong influence on me. Not that it helped me. I mean, some people, and that might be my personality, some people might have been determined to do, but I was in a very strange environment, looking back at it all, where it was not easy to make friends and so on. And but I survived. It was the first experience I had of academia being prejudiced. I mean, that was just prejudice. And I think I had the feeling that when one is intelligent, one isn't prejudiced. And that wasn't so at all. You know, one tended to hold on to such beliefs. Oh, in the world of academia, people wouldn't have such feelings. But I really suffered then. The content, as for the content, I was a bit disappointed in the in what we had to learn. I mean, you know, psychology, you learn about what rats can do and so on. So as a result, it was the social psychology that interested me. And I couldn't wait for the time when I would leave the academic sector and go on to the postgraduate training, which I did at the Child Guidance Training Center. And there, I think I flourished. I don't know, I mean, it could just be the atmosphere. I never got the feeling there that I was doing the impossible in the terms of the type of work. We used to have what we called case conferences every day. And when you presented some work that you'd done. And of course, the training center trained social workers and psychiatrists. So, and there were only 4 psychologists trained per year. So we had a varied audience to our case conferences, and it wasn't unusual for people to say in the common room, "Oh, Waveney, today's your case conference. I'm coming." You know, I think that I did fairly well. But from the moment I was exposed to tests, I realized, no, this is not for our children. Our children wouldn't be able to cope with this. And one of the main reasons was because in the preschool days, the emphasis was placed on the repetition of nursery rhymes. Education was centered around learning, not so much learning how to abstract and to relate what you've learned to the work you're doing, but just repeating what you heard. And This was begun at school, before school, by grandmothers who always were the people who tested the children in that way, started education at home using nursery rhymes. And education itself was really geared to that sort of thing, to repetition of words. Our children, when they came here, found it was different. And I'm sure that they felt insecure when questions were asked of them, which they had never been asked before. Also, something else that affected our children was the use of words. We were still at the stage, and I say we in the West Indies, were still using the language that people like Somerset Maugham used. The first time I opened a book of his, I noticed, my gosh, all of the words that we use, like a grip for a suitcase, a pipe for the word tap. And those were the words that we were stuck in. Language moves, and in the West Indies, it moved too slowly for our children to bridge the gap between what and how they learned, between that in the West Indies and that here.
Because you were saying that you felt that the language in the test meant that children didn't do as well as they could do.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. There's no doubt that children didn't do well. I was disappointed that nobody, for example, the school psychological service, I would have thought that they would be interested in that and pursue that, and perhaps do a project, a small project. It was all left to individual psychologists who just believed what was written in the books by the Americans. I mean, England copied from the Americans. There's no doubt about that. The intelligence tests, those are the American tests. The risk and the Stanford Binet and those, they were used in America first.
And what impact do you think that had on black children and ESN schools?
Well, it meant that children were placed in the wrong schools. Placed in the wrong schools with nobody's acceptance of it. I mean, I got a message once from an American psychologist. I can't remember who told me about her, but she was over here and was asking, was there a black psychologist? And she wanted to meet this black psychologist. And I got a similar message from an American social worker. Not at the same time, but they were both disappointed in the fact that there was nobody who came forward and said, let's look at this again. Let's look at ourselves in a way and see what we are not doing. I blame the British Psychological Society quite a lot for that. I went to one of the conferences, the yearly conferences, and I found myself asking myself this question: what are you doing here?
So what messages would you give now, thinking about what could be done to support children.
I still feel that the British Psychological Society should be much more involved. I don't know what they do now, because I'm out of it. I've been out of it such a long time. But the emphasis is on the academic side of things. All right, that's fine. I enjoy reading the articles and so on in the journals, but there should be more emphasis on how children learn. I feel strongly about that.
I think that's important.
And that emphasis is better for our society. It's better for the children. It's better for the parents. It's better for the whole country. And it's sad that that's not what's being done now.
I think you'll be pleased to know that there's more work happening with the British Psychological Society in that area. But I definitely think that it's good that we're here to hear from you and to hear about things that can be
I'm
put in
very
place
pleased
to improve.
to hear that. I'm very pleased.
How do you feel about the fact, because you were talking about IQ tests and you've had a lot to say, how do you feel about the fact that they're still used in psychology today?
Yes, I stopped using IQ tests. I felt there came a time when I felt, well, away with you. This doesn't help me at all. It doesn't help me to tell the teacher how she must approach a child's learning in the classroom. It doesn't help me to find out why the child's approach to schoolwork is the way it is. And I noticed it from the time I was exposed to psychology tests. I mean, I kept looking at the tests and saying our children wouldn't be able to do this. And it's not in their experience at all. I mean, why give them these tests? Words which they never use, and concepts which they aren't aware of. Yes, I feel that much more work should be done, much more direct work. I don't know about now, but when I was working, one felt that the child was punished academically for what he didn't know, which was very bad, very, very bad.
But you were instrumental, I guess, in supporting the knowledge that children did know. So you were involved in the select committee that led to the Rampton Review, and it led to the Swan Report. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yes. I was not a member of the Rampton. I was co-opted. And there were people there who had done more direct work with children. Some were teachers and one or two were head teachers. But the thing that struck me was the prejudice that came out. Now, everybody was written to by the committee about something in education. And there was nothing that was sent back which didn't reflect prejudice. It's so sad. There wasn't any empathy. There wasn't any understanding. Again, not only the children, but their parents were dismissed for in a way being here. Every one of those replies reflected a lot of prejudice and the feeling that these people, they don't belong here. Then, no, what are they doing here? Those questions weren't asked direct, but they were at the bottom of everything that was written. And in my report, I had to say it. That's how I felt. And I don't know what the others wrote, but I was certain that the approach of the head teachers and teachers was quite, out of order in a way, with children whom they were teaching, because they never thought of what their own attitude, what effect it would have on those children. I once gave a talk to some teachers at London University, and a questionnaire which I submitted was about the person's feelings about the children. And the teachers objected strongly to that. I mean, I didn't see anything wrong with that. I mean, if you were in any relationship, and it is a relationship, you meet children every day, the same child, you have to teach the same child every day. And they felt it shouldn't have been there. And I felt, yes, it has to be. You must have some sort of feelings about these children, But that was a denial, and they didn't want to. Very few answered the question. Not everyone did.
It led to a number of recommendations, didn't it, about teacher attitudes, and you talk about
Yes.
feelings and beliefs and the impact on educational outcomes.
Yes.
When you think about the recommendations from the Swan report, how far do you think they went in terms of being implemented?
Well, I'm not sure that the Swan report did recommend much, and the Rampton did. And because many members of the Rampton pointed to things like prejudice, when Swan took, Rampton first of all was sacked. One has to remember that, because I think he went too far in allowing the teachers, the members of the committee, to say what they had found. Swan succeeded him, and Swan didn't go further than saying that, this was all a cultural thing, and in that children weren't bright enough and so on.
You said that the IQ tests led to high numbers of black boys being placed in ESN schools, what were called educationally subnormal schools. We wouldn't use that term now. Can you tell me a bit about your experience of working with some of those black boys?
Yes, I worked with some of those boys in the Saturday schools. I mustn't forget that. And they seemed to me to be quite different. Their behavior in these groups was quite different from that seen at school. And at school they became very difficult, and that was because the work, they didn't feel extended at all in the school environment, and so they behaved very badly. As a result, in one school, the head teacher asked the then social worker who worked in the school to have them deemed maladjusted, and she was very put out by this. She felt that they were labelled, they had one label, and here the head teacher was asking for them to be labelled a second time. And she felt that she was sure that they weren't maladjusted, that there wasn't enough to keep them thinking at school. And this was a person who had worked in America. She was an American, and she was so upset by this question that she began to ask around if there was any black psychologist who could help her. In other words, she wanted them seen by somebody who would be more sympathetic toward their needs, and see whether she could avoid getting them labeled maladjusted. I met her. She felt that there should have been a black group, and she was surprised that there wasn't a black group who would take up that case for the community. And so she was left with me. I felt, well, all right, I agreed I would see these children because she wanted them seen, but I was not allowed to do so.
So in spite of that, so some of those messages that were like hurtful or damaging, you still went on to be involved in the publishing of the book by Bernard Coe that looked at the education of the West Indian children and the impact of the system, the British system, education system. Can you tell us a little bit about that, your involvement in that?
Oh, well, yes, we were, a group of us met often. Parents who became virtual community workers. We met in our homes, and we often met and talked about what we felt was the injustice done to our children. How could we redress that? And we decided to go nationwide in a way by holding a conference and inviting teachers who didn't know about it. This group, we called ourselves SEQUA, community workers. I'm trying to remember what's the name. It's in Bernard's book.
I've got the Caribbean Education and Community Workers Association.
Yes, it's a long name. We held quite a successful conference, and Bernard was invited to speak. And he was really electrifying. He was a student and had been teaching in his holidays off from university. He taught ESN children just by chance. And he felt that these children were not being extended in the classroom, and was passionate about it, about the injustice that was done. And he was sure that this was prejudice. I felt strongly that people honestly believed that these children were dull. And to me that was worse, because it meant that our whole group of black people, we were regarded as dull people. And the people who taught these children felt that we just didn't know what we were talking about, because we weren't teaching them. And we didn't know how dull we were. And that was something that really hurt the likes of us when we met and could talk about things.
So what would you hope that educational psychology as a profession will take away from all of the work that you've carried out so far?
Well, I would hope that people will learn to understand all the influences that the children, the good and the bad. The good influences were those that they learned at home, and they did learn a lot at home. And the bad influences would be what people thought about them. And I hope that whenever they're thinking about Black children, that people would think beyond what is produced in the classroom. I'm living proof of that, of what I produced, and which was, it was mismarked, it wasn't marked at all, and see how, what effects that would have on people.
Thank you, Waveney, so much for today. It's been absolutely inspirational to hear about your journey and think about where the profession can go from here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.